So I might got some Jersey isms, or the Jersey might come out with their pronunciations over here. Reiki, Rocky. How do we pronounce this? Because I think a lot of people don't know, right?
Yeah, or may have misconceptions about what this is, but it's Reiki. So REI, so Ray, and then Ki, KI.
So I was right originally with Reiki, but then like again from being from the East Coast, overthinking everything. So I'm like, maybe it's Reiki, and then you start playing with things, and next thing you know, it's like forget
Yeah.
about it by the time you get to it. Either which way, I thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with the listeners about what it is that you do. So without further delay, we now know how to pronounce it. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm excited to share this information with, your people, your platform. And specifically, I was thinking about this earlier, not only just because of like sharing the work, but there's actually a lot of correlation between, the martial arts, that your background and Reiki. There's a lot of overlap, specifically when it comes to like how you meditate and drawing your energy into specific energy centers in your body, like how you stand. And so there's a lot here that you might not realize that are actually pretty related. So, Reiki is an energetic healing system that comes from Japan. And there's a lot of misconception around like the origins of Reiki and how it came to be. But it is a Japanese specific practice. And it's an energetic healing modality, and there's energetic healing modalities in all cultures. This is specific to Japan though. So that's what sets it apart. And it has become a bit westernized, a bit like new aged over time. And I think that there's a lot of things that are attached to Reiki as a practice that can sometimes maybe throw people off. Specifically when it comes to Christians, I find that like Christians are the ones that go really hard against Reiki. And I just find it really funny because it's not a religion. So um, that's what's like the hang up that I think people kind of don't get is that you could be a Christian, you could be Muslim, you can be, Jewish and receive Reiki because it's not a religion, it's a practice, just like meditation's a practice. And I think people get like really caught up on that and think like, oh, like this practice, if you go for a Reiki session, it's like the devil's work or it's witchcraft, and it has nothing to do with the devil or witchcraft. So it's an energetic healing modality that anyone can do. You don't have to be a special person to do this work. Anyone can take a class and learn how to do this. And it really taps into everyone's own natural healing ability. I mean, think about like when you have your own injury or something, like what is your first response is to bring your hands to an area that hurts. And without realizing it, that in itself is you intentionally bringing your hands to an area. And without realizing it, you're doing energy work to yourself. So we have quantifiably a ton of nerve endings in our hands. So our hands are really sensitive. And so it makes sense that we would transmit energy through our hands. And so while everyone can do this, I mean, think about like when holding a baby. What do you do to soothe down a baby? You rub a baby's back. So that in itself is a way to relax and calm a baby's nervous system. We are all doing this all the time without really kind of understanding it. And so when we intentionally then do energy work, it amplifies the effect. And when we are doing Reiki specifically, we're just translating a more concentrated level of energy that we're really in contact with all the time. So it's really not so far out in a way that I think some people think.
I think that's excellent and so much to unpack, and excellent that you touched on religion because I was going to go there. And again, like the synergy I was talking about last week, and we'll talk about that as well to unpack my session that I did. For those listening to that, I could give you my experiences that I had and my take. And you had mentioned that I could see people getting, religion twisted with this. Like Does it have to be, specific to a culture? Is it a belief system? Is it a way of life? Is it a practice? Are there certain restrictions? Are there health benefits? Are there side effects? Because everyone's always worried about those sort of things. I know people worry
Yeah,
about certain massages, being, generating certain things for their blood pressure, whether
right.
stimulating it or bringing it down in certain
Yeah.
situations. But I think it's great again that you were able to explain it in that way, that it does connect throughout the boundaries of just being identified to a culture. It could be a very spiritual thing just in its own practice.
Right. Well, I mean, there's interesting overlap when it comes to the Japanese esoteric religion known as Shinto in terms of like you see Shinto's influence in Buddhism and Buddhist practices, in martial arts, same thing in
Mm-hmm.
Reiki. So there's might be similar sounds, symbology, how you intone certain words that are similar. But again, Reiki is this healing system. It's a modality of energy that what's great about Reiki is that it really meets you where you are. It has its way of its own intelligence. It has its way of understanding where it needs to go in the body, what it needs to do. And it really has nothing to do. It's not a religion. And so anyone from any walk of life can come to receive an energy healing service. So for instance, Reiki's done in hospitals. You see Reiki done in at like John Hopkins and other hospitals, throughout the country. And it's also done in places like hospice for end of life. It's a great way to assist someone in, their death process. And I've done Reiki for people who are in hospital, in as a way to help relieve them from their stress or panic, which oftentimes happens for people in their death process, the panic beforehand. And so it helps to ease and relax their nervous system. So I've done that a few times, but I also work with people. I've literally in the last 6 months, interestingly, I've worked with a lot of people who are about to go into surgery and they want me to do energy work simultaneously. And so, I've had to get up at like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, while people are getting prepped for anesthesia and start the energy work process there. What's great about Reiki too is that it enhances the efficacy of any kind of medications that people are using. So if you see a Reiki practitioner, it doesn't matter if you're taking blood pressure medication, statins for cholesterol or anything like that. Even when it comes to like mental health, if you're taking SSRIs, Reiki has this ability to enhance the efficacy. So it's helpful in bringing, equilibrium balance into the body. And so I really see it as a complementary alternative method to healing. So it really meets allopathic medicine in a really interesting way. And so if we could take away like this new age, unfortunate, like this, like kind of like new age attachment to it and kind of cut through all that, we understand that it's actually a practice. And the unfortunate thing too is that I find that a lot of spiritual practitioners who may have learned Reiki from this more Western perspective attach a lot of these like new age terminologies to things, to the work. And I'm not saying I'm not someone that did that maybe almost 20 years ago when I started or had these ideas. But it really is a very simple practice. And I'm actually circling now more to looking at Reiki from this like origin point, which is like, what was the Japanese tradition? Because there's only 3 teachers in the country who teach Reiki from the true Japanese lineage, which is called Jikiden Reiki. And so most of the people who are attuned to Reiki don't really understand its full origins. So for instance, with Reiki, people talk about like the chakras and like, yes, you can apply Reiki to the energetic points in the body known as chakras. But from a Japanese cosmology, when we look at Japanese energy centers, there's only 3. And chakras are part of like the Indian tradition, and it had nothing to do with the Japanese culture. So there's a lot of like misconceptions, unfortunately. And if we kind of can strip away all of these things and these attachments, we really get to see that there's this simplicity and beauty to the energy itself that we don't have to like assign labels to. And so it doesn't matter what your religious background is. The great thing about getting started in my work in New York is that I've had the ability to work with people from all different walks of life. So all sorts of cultures and customs, and it's beneficial for various things like mental health, anxiety. But I've had a lot of opportunity to work with people who've been really ill, either like healing from a surgery, post surgery. So it speeds up the healing time, especially when it comes to like scar tissue. There's a lot of quantifiable evidence that Reiki does enhance a lot of healing in the body. And there's been a lot of studies that shown that Reiki during a 1 hour session there's a lot of evidence around changes within like blood pressure, bringing the body into a place of homeostasis, because most people unknowingly are in kind of like a fight or flight state, maybe because of like trauma they've experienced or just like the nature of the world that we live in. Everything is just like so much and go, go, go. And then what the beauty of someone receiving a Reiki session is, even if they're not coming for like a specific thing, like an injury, but maybe they've been having insomnia, they're having digestive health issues. And for an hour, this energy is helping their body go into a state of rest and digest. And when their body is in a state of rest and digest, that's when the body's own natural healing mechanisms kick in. And so this isn't about God or spirituality. This is just the nature of giving the body space to do its own thing, because our bodies are these intelligent, living, you know, uh, beautiful creations that have their own healing mechanisms. So,
I
yeah,
I love this on so many levels. It's like I wish that most musicians could easily describe things the way you did right there. It just is what it is. Like, you ask a musician, "Hey, what kind of a band do you have?" Well, it's like a post-Renaissance hardcore mixed with like, some neo-prog with some fusion, every once in a while, like we bring back like some 80s punk. It's like, man, it just is what it is. It is what you want it to be. Like, that's what I took away from it, at least my experience. You mentioned the digestion, and for me, my experience was we went right for the stomach. Like, you sensed it right away that mine was digestive, that mine was in my core. And then you also said something about resting, sleeping. Like, ever since I've had that session, I've digested food and slept way better than I have in months. Both of those two things right there just freaked me out, that you just mentioned that in this interview. So that's my connection right there. So that's what I took away, is whatever it did for me in that session continuously shows its benefit from how I felt that day, which the core was the stomach. And I'm still
right.
benefiting from that healing point of which the healing started from me
Yeah.
and my experience with Reiki.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that with me. And and that's what I really like too about this work is that I think people have this idea that you have to be in like a spiritual crisis or in some type of like existential crisis in your own life to experience this work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really, even when it comes down to things like digestive health issues, the inability to sleep, migraines, I mean, those are appropriate reasons to also receive energy work in conjunction with whatever allopathic medicine that you might be
Sure.
doing. So, and there's times where I've had people come in and I'm getting the sense that, you know, I really think aside from this work, you also may want to look into seeing a nutritionist, or maybe you should see an herbalist, or some type of talk therapy. Like, and that's what's really great about Reiki is that Reiki helps kind of align things in a way where it kind of gives you post session like an aha moment about like, oh, maybe I should be even changing my directionality in a different way. So it's interesting because like you might be coming in for some of these reasons like migraines or stomach health issues. Maybe you've got chronic back pain. But what's interesting about the work is that it allows you to come into a state of balance. And then you don't realize, and a few days later, you have this idea, something comes into your awareness, and you're like, huh, you know what? I think I'm going to apply to that job that I was thinking about. Because now you're able to not be thinking so much about your pain or how you're tired or
Right.
the things that are distracting you from maybe going after the thing that you want to do, or maybe certain things that you've been trying to like pull into your life, and you unknowingly have been projecting maybe a lot of fear, and then you get this Reiki session and you're like, huh, I'm not feeling as fearful, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later you get the phone call about maybe that job that you had reached out to a few months ago, and it was, up in the air. So I've had a lot of things like that, just by talking to clients post session. And so throughout, almost 20 years of doing energy work, it really does work on various levels of reality, like, the emotional body, the mental body, the physical body. And it has a way of kind of equalizing everything in a way where things are now working in a more cohesive way. Like, the physical body and the mental body are working more in tandem so that you're able to have deeper clarity on things. I've had really interesting experiences where I had a client who was in her early 20s and had like not spoken to a parent for like 4 years, and just was like really had just like a lot of anger around her experience growing up. And, we had done numerous sessions, and then like one day she came in and she just like had a different look in her face, and she was like, I just wanted to tell you, I just reconciled with my mom, because the energy work kind of helped her to process some of these emotions that she'd been really holding on to. And, you might not necessarily have that awareness while you're receiving the Reiki that these things are going to shift for you. And I don't even think it's necessarily something that I need to point out. It's like, I'm just going to sit back, do the work, and however it processes for you and how it's supposed to look, it's going to be exactly what you need, and it's going to look different for every person. So that's what's really cool about the work, is that I've seen so many different types of experiences. There isn't necessarily like a someone comes in, they lay down, I do the energy work, and there's like this beginning, middle, and end, and there's this like box where you check off all the things that
Right.
happen for you. Everyone kind of has like a different experience. And I think that's what's really cool, because there's no like prescriptive way of how this is going to look for everyone. And so it's really interesting. I've even noticed that with Reiki students who I've trained over the years, huge transformations. Like, oh, I studied Reiki, and I always tell people, pay attention, mark it in your calendar that you're starting Reiki training today, because a year from now, your life might look drastically different. And I've had people like change relationships, move across country, change jobs, like huge life things that maybe they didn't see coming. And you can apply that to like a lot of different practices, like meditation. You can apply that to breath work, all sorts of modalities. So Reiki is not the only type of practice that people can get into where they can have these like big life shifts, but it's just one that I find has been like a consistent thing. Even though I do other types of work within my practice, Reiki has been like the most, I think, transformative for me in my own life too. Like after 20 years, I could tell you that I didn't expect to be where I am today with this work. I really didn't think it would be what it is, and that, I'd have clients not only all over the world, but I go to different cities to work with people, and it's amazing. All walks of life, children, babies, older folks,
Oh
working with
yeah. And
men too. It's great.
and I'm sure you hear the feedback the same way I'm going to give you mine about like what you were saying right there. I look at that as the cleansing, like getting the wheels going in motion for where the focus should be, which when you have a lot of stuff that's built up and it starts to cleanse itself out, the focus can concentrate. if your arm is not bleeding and your arm's bleeding rather, and you fix it, you stop the bleeding, you can focus then on what you need to do because you're not bleeding anymore. It's like that with
Exactly.
everything. It's just like common sense. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like what it felt like for me. And like I like that you also put to the point that you don't have to be damaged. You don't really need that. It could just be something that you want to do for yourself and maybe benefit from. Wow, I didn't realize that I needed that little chin check, if you will, for lack of a better, like,
Right.
I want to try something new. Like I've done massage, I've done this, I've done yoga, I've done this. And most people that do those things are open-minded. And so therefore I can benefit from something that you're providing, right?
Right, exactly. And it's interesting how it translates for everyone differently too. Like I've had people say, "Whoa, I didn't expect to maybe feel so much." Or like, "Oh, that was weird. I felt like a lot of tingling or like a wave-like sensation," or
Yeah,
everyone kind of has like a different experience.
right,
And I've had people even be like, "I actually didn't feel anything in particular, but I feel really deeply relaxed." And I'm like,
right.
that self, if that's what you can walk away with, a deeper sense of relaxation, then I've already done my job. Like it's not like if you're not feeling something specific that it's not working. Everybody has a different level of sensitivity, and I'm sure you understand this, like with with
Of
martial
course.
arts, right? It's like you're connecting your breath, when you're doing certain stances, when you're feeling kind of like chi and you're
Hmm.
focusing in on chi, the more you do something like any practice, like riding a bike, even the better you get at it, right? So if
Yes,
you're putting
man.
more attention to trying to kind of sense chi, everybody can do this. So like when I have students for Reiki, that before we even get into the attunements of Reiki, I'm just like, just rub your hands together and just go like this. You can feel a sense of chi or your awareness, right? It's like you're walking down the street, maybe you had a park a few streets away because there was no parking, and all of a sudden you just sense that maybe there's someone behind you. Sure enough, you look, maybe half a block down, there's someone behind you. Your energy field alerted you before your brain even knew.
Yeah, it's the
Everybody
truth.
has this internal sense of energy,
Oh,
you know, and
absolutely.
right. And it's like, and this is what really this is. It's like when you're practicing Reiki and you're doing it for yourself or for others, you're just paying more attention to energy. But everybody can do this. Everybody has an energetic quality and nature to them. I mean, think about vibes, right? It's just a different way of saying energy. You walk into a space or a restaurant or a bar or something, and it's like something feels off, or like, I don't know, this
Fuck yeah.
something about this feels off. I don't
Absolutely.
know, right? And I'm sure like you, like playing shows, you go to certain venues and you're like, I just something feels
You're
like
like,
off.
when
Just
something's
know,
dicey right away.
right? Yeah, you just know like tonight might not go as smoothly as has before. And that's literally
Definitely.
you feeling into the energy of things. So none of this stuff is really that far out. And I think if people can just kind of see that it's a lot simpler than they think, yeah, but I mean anybody can do this work. And I think that the only difference is the amount of attention and focus that you put into something, right? It's like
Yes.
with drumming, right? It's like, I'm sure you tell that with your students. You can show them
Yeah. Yeah,
everything,
absolutely. And I like that you
you know?
mentioned hands, because of, again, with drumming, you have to be delicate, certain songs you have to be real relaxed with, and for example, I was doing Purple Rain by Prince the other day. And I was
Yeah.
telling people, and obviously I say this to my adult students, I'm like, make love to the drums here. You know what I'm saying? Treat it like you're making love to it. When we play Disturbed, that's different. It's different energy. You know what I'm saying? But it's like that's what I love about it, and that's what the whole thing is with any type of energy. You could feel that vibe, that power. It doesn't have to be physical, even like you said, the aura. Like you could feel it off someone when they come in my room, and again with drumming, there's a lot of energy in that in itself. Just the art of doing it, the experience doing it.
Yeah.
People could feel if you're positive and you're doing something that's inspiring, man. And you come in my room, usually the energy's happy, unless I'm having a really bad day, and I'm pretty good at hiding shit. But
Yeah.
I think it's great for the majority of people out there. that are just in any walk of life, really to experience and keep themselves open-minded to things like this. Because, it's like at the end of the day, it takes the effort of just trying something new. And if it's for you, you found something new to do with your lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right, exactly. And what's interesting with Reiki too, as a modality, is that it's its own energetic structure that can't be like altered. So meaning that it can't be used for harm. The only thing that I think people would attach to that is like if you're a bad person, maybe you're manipulating how you talk about Reiki so that you make people fearful so that they come back a million times. And it's like
Yeah.
that shouldn't be the goal, right? Is that, but we could say that with any kind of profession or any kind of practice, right? It's like if you approach the work with a level of integrity and honesty, and we don't make false claims or guarantees, because
Right.
it's like I try really hard to not be so attached to the work. Like I let the work happen. But everyone's experiences are different. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a modality that maybe you love. Like I've had clients that came in and like, this was cool, but I think I like acupuncture better. Great. It's like not everything has to be for everyone. And I wish that was just enough of in the end of the discussion, because again, like if you look at the discourse on like TikTok, Instagram. And it's like some of the things that I hear people say about Reiki, I'm just like, God, that is like so not true. As someone who's been doing this work for almost 20 years,
Mhm.
some of the
Ever
things
since
I
I've known you,
hey
and
attached, yeah, just like this is not true.
ever since I've known you, yeah. And would you put it, this is interesting areas that we're getting into because it ties into, and again, this is what's awesome about, and for those listening, we've known each other for so long. We go back like over 20 years, like a long time. So maybe that's why we read each other so well. Would you categorize this stuff like in cupping and all that goes along? Would you categorize this in a similar thing like stoning and all that kind of stuff, or is this something completely different?
I mean, it's a healing modality. And we could see the origins, similarly as far as like the application. For instance, the way in which the Reiki energy moves through the body is through these lines of energy in our bodies called the meridians. And the meridian lines, everybody has them. And what's really cool, regardless of like gender, culture, race, background, if I stimulate this point in your
Yeah,
hand, it's a liver point, I'm sorry, a large intestine point. So if I stimulate this large intestine point, on any person, it's going to have a very similar effect.
yeah.
And so these things transcend like culture, religion, background. It's like, or if I stimulate, with tuning forks, these points in here, this is related to kidneys, and the association of the kidney emotion is fear. Most people kind of have like this natural like reaction of they take a breath. Everyone's going to have this experience. So the meridian lines are the lines that are used in acupuncture. So it's very similar, but doing very different things. And cupping, yes, part of Chinese medicine, just a different way to approach the body, but it has very much the same similarities. It's just using different things. So with acupuncture, we're being more specific with certain points using needles. With Reiki,
Right.
it's more dispersed. The energy is being dispersed in a different way.
And what got you into wanted to be a practitioner to do this?
This is where it gets a little, this is where it gets a little woo. So when I was a teenager, um, I grew up for part of my life in a, traditional Mexican household. And my tia, it was very common for her to be like, hey, these family members are going to come to town and stay with us for like a week. And I'm like, okay. And it would be like, oh, it's our cousin so and so from like our great aunts, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, do we even know these people? But like, but sure. So it's really common for us to just have these like just random family members because like they'd want to go to New York. And so they'd stay with us in Jersey and they'd go and have their time in New York and but stay with us. So this happened. And it was, a relatively like younger cousin than like someone that was like maybe my tia's age in like her 50s. And so my cousin Daniel comes with his wife, who's German, and they come with this bird in a wooden cage. And they're like super hippy dippy looking. And I'm just kind of like, who are these people with their bird? Like, this is so weird. But so they were living in Hawaii, come to stay with us. And at that age, you're like, I care about hanging out with my friends. Like, I don't care about hanging out with family, right? So I really wasn't trying to like get to know them. And about like a few days into the trip, Daniel knocks on my door in my room, and I'm like, what is he gonna tell me? Like it's dinner time or something? So I open the door and he's like, hey, can we have a chat? I have something I want to tell you. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. And so we sit down on the floor in my room, and he like tells me this wild story that he had while in Mexico in the desert, like going to hang out with some Mexican shamans. He tells me that on the bus from Mexico City, he had fallen asleep numerous times. And when he was in his dream states, he was seeing my dad. And then he was kind of like, what's going on? Like, why am I thinking about this man, my dad, who he knew, but not really that well? And so once they make it to their destination, he's the last one on the bus. And he wakes up and he goes to grab his bag and he stands up. And now that he's awake, now he sees an apparition of my father. And he's like, whoa, what is going on here? So he goes to the payphone because in these days it was the 90s, or I'm sorry, late 80s, at this point, no cell phones. So he goes to a pay station or a payphone and he's like calling his mom, just be like, hey, I made it here. I'm going to be in the desert. Like, won't be around a phone for a while, just let you know I'm arrived. And she's like, Daniel, I just want to tell you that your cousin Armando died, and it was my dad. And so he was so struck by this, so that when he went to go hang out with the shamans in the desert, he asked them, like, what is this? What does this mean? Like, what's the story around this? And come to find out that the shamans were telling Daniel, like, that my dad had immense energy, had immense capacity, could have been a healer, but he just didn't actualize it in his life because he died. And that they told him to tell me that I had this potential. You can imagine I'm a freshman in high school. I'm just like, you know, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, he's like, you should really look into like Reiki and read books by Carlos Castaneda and like all these like other spiritual things. And I'm just like, I was a little taken aback. I'm like, you're touching on a
Siddhartha?
subject here, I'm like,
Siddhartha, right? Carlos Castaneda, that's Siddhartha.
he's an author, yeah, yeah,
Wow, I
and
remember that book. Holy shit.
yeah. So I was like a little taken aback, and I was just like, all right, I don't really know this dude. He's talking to me about my dad. I don't know. I just was like kind of like I heard it, but I was a little like reactive and a little rebellious to the information. So wouldn't you know, he winds up leaving. Him and his wife, they go. It was like a week in total. As I started getting older, I remember having to go to Barnes and Noble on Route 22, because I used to go there all the time. And I was looking for a certain book for a paper for school. Um, and I went past this one row and it was like Reiki. And then like throughout like the next few years in high school, like I would always be in certain situations where people would be talking about it, or I'd hear the word, or and I'm just like, oh, it's so weird. It kept kind of following me around. And then even in high school, I remember like a friend of mine sitting in front of me in class. She really wasn't feeling well. And I would just like put my hands on her back, and just like, and I don't even know what I was doing. I was just kind of
Yeah.
like, just help her out, make her feel better. So I mean, everybody has this like innate ability to tap into this energy. We all do. It's just that when we receive a Reiki attunement, it's just that the concentration of the energy as it comes out of your hands, it's just stronger. But everybody, I mean, like, you make a chi ball with your
Yeah.
hand, you feel the energy. You can close your eyes
Oh,
and just
absolutely.
really scan your
Heat,
face, feel it, the
just
heat.
natural heat in itself, 100%. And I think it's great that you stuck with it and committed. Like that's how deep that was. And hearing that story again, I remember you telling me that when we first met, like all those years ago. And I remember you telling me about that. You went to Union Catholic, right?
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
remember you to see. I remember shit like this, man. I'm
Yeah.
crazy. People tell me all the time. Like even the fact that I remembered Siddhartha just now. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
one of those things, man. It's pretty wild. And I couldn't help but to ask this question coming up. Is there any tie to music with Reiki at all? Is there any like kind of music that is known to be done like with any kind of like traditional, like when you're performing it or doing it, or is there anything that's connected to it?
I mean, there's people that enhance the music that they make with Reiki energy. And so, like, if you type in like on YouTube or Spotify, you could definitely find like Reiki playlists or Reiki driven music, like different drummings or different beats and stuff, or like different music that it's in hertz, like heart opening, and it's like 432 hertz, and you can binaural beats. I listen to like a lot of that stuff. I also listen to like a
Yeah.
lot of sound bowls on YouTube. Like if I want
Yeah.
meditation, I love that stuff. But interestingly, all of that stuff about the story, I wanted to be a rock and roll singer. I wanted to be Karen O. Like that's what I wanted. You know what I mean? So
Oh
at
yeah.
growing up, like I thought like, oh, like I just, I wanted to be in bands, and I did like a trip hop record, and I was doing some music, my own. And that's what I really thought I was going to do. And so it's so funny that it like, while it may have been slightly predestined for me to do this work, I mean, I really had thought I was going to do something else. And so there's still a lot of like rock and roll influence in me, obviously. I mean, not every Reiki practitioner may look like me. I'm not a hippy dippy, and you don't need to be, right? You don't need to be hippie to do this work or real out there. But for instance, one of the playlists that I have has how like they make songs now that are for babies, but it's like they take the song and make it like almost sound like a lullaby.
Mhm.
So I have a playlist that has Deftones on there change, but it's in this like lullaby, like kind of like for babies. So I have that on like a playlist. I have an instrumental song by Russian Circles on one of my playlists. I really like, there's some songs by Sigur Rós that I like that's kind of relaxing and chill. But some like prog instrumental stuff, like I kind of somehow bring in some of that stuff into the playlists just because it's cool. And I have a lot of clients too that are like alternative, and being in New York, I've see people, all sorts of people, but I do have clients that come to me because maybe they look similar to me, or they're tattooed, or like
Yeah.
they're a little alt, and they might feel better coming to see me than maybe going to see someone else that isn't
Yeah.
maybe that
I
aesthetic.
get that too. One of my buddies back home breaks my balls every once in a while. He's like, you're a fetish, John. He's like, you got to be a certain type, kind of like you, bro.
Right. Like, and I think like people gravitate to like what they're comfortable with, right? And
Exactly. I think it's because we carry ourselves very real and genuine. We never were the type, hey, look at me for attention. If you looked at people, and I not to speak for you, but I mean the people that we associate with for the most
yeah,
part, or at least back then, was you looked at us because maybe is because we were like, the type to look at because we were involved in some cool shit. We were in bands, we were artists, we were around artistic people. Not that we were the
exactly.
coolest cats in the world, but everyone collectively, we all looked like, I mean, I remember like in for example, certain bands I was in, people like were saying that you all look like gang members and like this and that. It's like we all had identity, but
Yeah.
we had a character, man. We were cool,
Right.
the tattoos, the identity, whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like I think we were really lucky, I think, coming up, because New Jersey had such a really interesting, like, there's like the metal scene, there
Oh,
was like,
absolutely.
remember, I mean, New Brunswick, like,
Oh,
like
absolutely.
post-hardcore. I mean, there was like, early days of metalcore, like all sorts of interesting things were going on in New York.
Absolutely.
We were around all of that.
So yeah, for us to like grow up the identity around people, so many characters.
Yeah, and I feel like that when you grow up in like a culture, like a deep music culture, like I think it's hard to even like completely step away from that. Because like I'll run into people from back in the day, who are like, oh yeah, like I still go to like shows. Maybe I don't go to everyone, but like, or like I'm maybe home a lot earlier because we're older now. But there's something really special and specific to like New Jersey and New York, like music and if we, we grew up in that culture, and it's like I feel like that's just an intrinsic part of like who we are. It's part of our nature. It's like, oh man, like it's such a time and place thing. And it doesn't matter like what we do. It's like there's a still like there's a specific thread to that when it comes to music. Because I still actively love music just as deeply as I did then. Like that wasn't just like a just being a teenager or early 20s, like being part of a scene like that music subculture, New Jersey, New York, that kind of like music vibe, like that never left me. Like I'm still just as like genuinely interested in like bands and music and going to shows. I mean, here's what's a really cool thing to kind of tie in like the Reiki and music. So in 2023, I made a few work trips solely based on the concerts that I was going to. So like I made a work trip out to North Carolina because I went to go see Bad Omens there. Then I made a work trip out to Austin because I was going for Depeche Mode. Like, then I made another work trip back to New York because I was going to see The Cure. Like, music is
Wow.
still such a huge part of my life. Like
Yeah.
that I center a lot of what I do work-wise around what shows I'm going to. And I think for me, music has a beautiful way of also clearing your energy. Like that music, either listening or playing can alchemize your mood and alchemize your energy. Like you could be feeling one way, you put a record on, you feel differently. You play something, you feel differently. So it's a really interesting way to tie in because I can see how the energy of music can shift people just like Reiki.
That's incredibly put. And another thing about going back to Jersey is that we were coming up at a time when Jersey was really starting to get glorified, on the map. You had Sopranos doing
Right.
its thing. New Jersey was starting to be recognized, and the tri-state
Yeah.
area, Sex in the City. A lot of big things were happening. The
100.
hardcore scene was now
Yeah.
becoming a little bit more acceptable to leaning towards the new metal genre. So now we
Mhm.
were, I guess the term would be selling out, and now we were all jockeying for position to win battles of the bands. Everyone was playing in
Yeah.
Philadelphia and Staten Island. We were all like
Right.
celebrities and gangs. Remember the movie The Fucking Warriors? That was like all the bands. Like I swear to Christ, one day I want to write a comedy about this, about
Right.
like all the bands that were out there in that scene in that era, because we were a bunch of badasses, man. And every one of us were all everybody was good. I don't care what anyone says.
Yeah.
We all talk shit, but everyone was good. Everyone was fucking good.
Some of the best times that I had in those days was like I remember when going to see your band, um and we had some of the best times in Philly.
Oh
Like
my God.
that was a great time. But like when I think about back then, like we just had like great access to so much, like different types of venues, like different experiences, getting to see other bands from like Long Island or whoever come into play. I mean, we were exposed to a lot of different things. And I think like man, we're so lucky because other people throughout the country who don't have that kind of exposure. Like I think about now, the kids now coming up, like they're getting their music from TikTok, from, Instagram, YouTube, and they don't have the same type of connection to the culture that we did because it was different. Like we would go to record stores because we knew a certain record was coming out. We would go to a record store or Guitar Center to pick up like a magazine because we knew this interview was coming out with certain bands that we liked.
Yeah.
Like we just had a different relationship to the culture and the scene and music. That's so different that I think is lacking in today's music scene. And I feel like that's why there isn't so much of like a loyalty to like a type of genre or a scene, or like I'm punk, or like I'm like post-hardcore, or like I'm into this,
Right.
or I'm like goth or whatever, because now, because of phones and videos, it's like it's only like the aesthetic that we're seeing, and it's less about like the community and the culture. Like we were lucky like to have that kind of like exposure and the community
Yeah.
and the vibe, and you know knowing that like we could show up at a random bar, or a club, and like we're going to know people because we knew people from the community.
And you're going to see a good band. And plus, we had access to, remember, like when you were growing up, you had albums you had to take care of and clean. If you left them out in
Yep.
too much heat, they would be damaged. You couldn't listen to them. You had connections. You read who was on the liner notes, who produced it, who recorded it, where they recorded it. It mattered.
Yeah.
Who fucking was the illustrator? Who was the person that did this? Who was the A&R person? Who did that?
Right.
And it mattered. And but now it's like nothing is tangible like that. Nothing matters like that, man.
Right. It's like people aren't looking for like, oh, like, oh, I know who produced this, or like the artwork that's in the liner notes. So I was talking to someone recently about like that, because someone asked me about this tattoo, and I was like, oh, that's Lane Staley art from his record of when you opened up the Mad Season album. That was some of his artwork that I have here. And then it took me 20 something years, but I finally got um
Awesome.
my white pony.
Oh, Deftones. Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So, like it took forever, but I finally did it. And yeah, I think music is still super like energetically enhancing for me in my life. Like, and I even tell my students this too, because I think people have this idea that to do energy work or be part of this world, like you can only like listen to like high vibe music. And to me, none of that even makes sense. It's like if I go to a show and I'm close to an amp, right? I can feel that power going through my body.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll go to a show and I feel so clear and so energized because of the way that the music has shifted my energy and like put me in a different mood. And, you know,
Yeah, of
um,
course.
and I think like we're all interacting with energy all the time without realizing it. We just don't think of
Of
it that way.
course.
Like if we can all kind of start to look at it from that perspective, I think things would be a lot different.
I totally agree with you, 100%. It's just a stop and realization. A lot of times people have to stop and do that because just because you're not realizing doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You know, to
Right.
stop into consciousness, like stopping and smelling the roses. Simply put, I do
Right.
it all the time. The older I get, I swear to God, I do it more and more, man. You know, and I'm glad that you mentioned your students. I want to talk about how we could find you, how people could study from you, how they could get your treatments or, have sessions with you, all about you. How could people find you? Give us some information if you don't mind.
Yeah. So my website's radicalreiki.com, and I am open for in-person sessions at my office in Flatiron in Manhattan at 928 Broadway. And I take in-person sessions on Fridays. And I also work doing sliding scale sessions for people who might not be able to afford my price in Flatiron. I work at Tiger Lily Holistic in Ridgewood, Queens, which is an acupuncture community center. And I'm there Mondays and Wednesdays for in-person energy work. So aside from Reiki, I also do Mexican rose healing, which is based out of like a curanderismo, which is like Mexican healing. And then online, I work doing Akashic record readings, which is guided information by people's guides and loved ones and spirits. And I also do mediumship readings and also remote Reiki sessions. And I mean, what's funny about that is that like I have clients who live in New York who book remote because they don't want to come into the office after they
Yeah.
got out of, they just want to go home, and they feel like they get the same result as doing remote than as in person. So it's just as effective. I think that people just might have a hard time wrapping their brain around it. But I also do a lot of community events too, or sometimes I'll do Instagram lives, I'll do free sessions. But I do community every third Sunday of every month. I do 9 p.m. Eastern, 1 hour of Reiki, and it's $11 to drop in. And I've got members who book for the year for every third Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern.
That's great.
So if you can't afford a regular just one-on-one session, doing the group community Reiki is a great way to have a really powerful session for an hour at a good cost. So I try to do things that are for like community-based work too.
That's wonderful. And again, that you're involved in so much and you stayed with it after all those years. Again, I keep saying that. I know you, and I value that so much when people do that, because that shows your passion and how much you stayed, again, true to what it is that you felt was a spiritual connection there, like a big message,
Yeah.
and you stayed committed to that. And that's great. And I thank you so much for coming on today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, this has been wonderful. So I really deeply appreciate it, and I'm excited to be exposed to your community, of entertainers and boxing people and martial arts. So
Although
thank
if
you
you're listening,
for having
you're
me in the
you're
mix.
gonna be getting your inbox is gonna be filled with a bunch of my crazy friends.
Well, I'm here for it. So, but people can find me too at Radical Reiki on Instagram, and that's where I post a lot about community events or online group Zoom events like guided meditations and things like that.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.